Good afternoon and welcome to DeFi Diving's YouTube channel, where today we're having probably our third deep dive into professional development. I've mentioned it before on the channel, one of the 5 best ways of getting the most out of your Divemaster, but now we're looking more at what are your options and what are your routes through Divemaster training and onwards into Instructor. So welcome to Andrew, who's our fresh, brand new off the production line instructor, who has a very interesting insight into the way which you might progress through your professional development training. So first of all, what is professional training and what is a dive pro?
So being a dive pro is that point in time where you decide to move from doing just something that you love for recreational reasons to actually trying to earn money from it. Now, whether that's enough money as a living or it's a hobby on the side, doesn't really matter. The point is that you are taking on a professional status. And what does that mean? That means that you are taking responsibility for the divers you're taking into yourself.
Absolutely.
And that's the fundamental change. That's the point where you, in a position of leadership, you're in a position of responsibility and you owe a duty of care to the people that you're going out with.
And we're also recognizing that being that it's a professional responsibility, it's a professional role, there's a degree of commerciality, there's a business that we're trying to run here. And so we're in the entertainment business. It's very much a discretionary spend business. We want to make sure that our clients enjoy spending time with us, and therefore it's important that we give them as good as an experience as possible so that they want to spend more time with us.
Yeah.
And that time isn't only the time that they spend underwater with us, but it's the time from the moment they walk down the garden path till we're waving them off at the end of the day.
It's the whole experience.
It's the whole experience. And so our job is to keep them entertained and keep them informed and keep them engaged throughout that entire experience so they come away going, I really enjoyed that. I'd like to do it again.
Yeah.
And that I see as an important part of being a dive pro. So one of the things we know is that there are some minimum qualifications in order to be able to step in and become a dive master or a dive professional. I'm not going to go through what those qualifications are. We'll link them below from some of the most common training agencies in the comment section below us. But the fundamentals to it is that there are a lot of individuals, a lot of people who will say they're not enough, that the entry requirements should be higher. And I've got my own view on that, which is that it's not about what the entry requirements are, but it's about the person who's presenting them to me. And therefore it's much more about attitude than the number of dives you've got or the badges that you can wear on your shoulder. And that is fundamentally that if you are somebody who is risk aware, will take responsibility and will demonstrate leadership, then having 40 dives to your name is probably enough. But if you're somebody who risk is something that goes way over your head, responsibility is somebody else's thing to think about.
Nervous,
anxious, demonstrates no leadership capabilities at all, then that's something that we need to focus a lot of attention on as we're building you up to the point that you can start to take responsibility for others. So is 40 dives and a rescue diver enough? It depends on the individual who you're presenting yourself with, I guess is the fundamentals.
And as I look back, I think if you're considering going through as a dive pro, looking at Divemaster, you should be able to assess yourself and just have that hard look and be honest about whether you feel ready to take on that responsibility.
Absolutely. And I think that to me is the crux of it. It shouldn't just be about it's the next badge.
Yeah.
Divemaster is not the same as deep diver or wreck diver or rescue diver. It's you're now looking at taking responsibility for other people's safety.
So we were going to talk a little bit about what the training pathway looks like at that point. There is the Recreational Scuba Training Council who set minimum standards, and what that essentially means is that by the time you're certified, no matter which agency who's aligned to RSTC, you should be coming out with the same basic knowledge. There is an element of different emphasis between some of the agencies. Obviously PADI and SSI are the main ones that are known, and PADI in the Divemaster training tends to lean on you being a certified assistant as the big emphasis, and in SSI they lean on the emphasis of being a dive guide. just to say again, there's no wrong or right there, and when you come to the end of your course, you should have covered essentially the same ground. It's just the kind of the flavour at that point. So yeah, if you know what you want to spend your time doing, you could make a choice at this point, but it is not the level where you need to really worry about your training agency. The good thing too about having those minimum standards is that any agency will have a half decent prescribed course structure which you can go and find out about, and that means that your approach through to becoming a dive master, you could do it as like weekend training, like every other Saturday with your dive club, and that could happen over 6 months. It could be that you're wanting to level up your training and you do it as a course, and that's very much about being a DMT, a dive master trainee. And then the next level, which you'll find a lot talked about online and we'll dig into a little bit more in a moment, is an internship. And an internship is essentially where you're being a dive master trainee, adding, you know, the richness of a centre and that experience to give you experience to go forward with. And a bit like we had a sort of a view about the attitude part of things, Gary does the DMT and internship a little bit differently, and I think it's a really interesting take. So you spend a moment just explaining what you do here.
Okay, so first of all, I'll explain what I don't do. I don't do a exchange type program where you give me labour, I'll give you my training. And the reason for that is that I have a fundamental assumption, it's a psychological assumption that says that we only get into things what we're prepared to put into it. And so if you're not prepared to invest in your training, you can't necessarily expect me to invest in your training.
Yeah, you just end up with the minimums both ways.
Exactly, and I've seen that around the world where free internships are offered. The level of training is scraping the bottom of the barrel as the minimum requirements, and I've never been comfortable delivering the minimum. So instead, what I would do is invite somebody over, or have somebody come over, and they will complete their Dive Master course. And my Dive Master course typically takes 3 weeks to complete, and in that time we will diligently go through each of the modules, ensuring that you have mastery of those sections and that can recognize the interconnectivity between them and gain experience guiding dives or teaching with an instructor. At the end of that course, you have the opportunity to stay on and transition into an internship where you will be part of our team and you'll work alongside our instructors as you gain the necessary experience to understand now that makes sense to me. And in that regard, we'll do here's a dive site. Why won't we dive it? Let's have a look at the conditions. To the point that you can now make those assessments yourselves and you understand the risks that we talked about and the risks that we now see. Ultimately, what I'm aiming for is that at the end of the internship, that you will feel competent and confident enough that you could take a client out on a solo dive, where you're the only dive professional with that client and you're happy with it, with site selection, route selection, management, and dealing with any issues as they come up, as well as that whole entertainment. That's a lot to take in, and when new dive masters, people who've just finished the course, transition over, quite often it's too much to comprehend, and so it's that walk slowly as we
like phases of competency.
Absolutely, and it's taking you from being absolutely task loaded to actually now this is water off a duck's back, and I can manage this, and I'm comfortable enough to do it. And so I'm happy to hold hands with somebody in a Jedi Padawan kind of relationship, which means that we can get you to the point where we are able to say, you are now ready. Go forth and become an instructor.
And that's kind of the luxury of coming to a centre like yours, is that with that lower volume of professional training, you can have that higher quality of relationship between the trainee and you as the master instructor.
Typically, yeah. And we have fun diving activity going on every day, and we have training courses going on very regularly. At the pro development level, we keep the volume low enough that we can dedicate that time to each individual.
Now, it's worth saying that in my experience, that's quite an unusual and beneficial model. What you'll find for a lot of centres is that you will get experience as you learn, because there's a big rhythm of guided diving going on and you will be involved in that an awful lot. The thing I would say, therefore, as you sort of work out what you want to do and where you want to go, get clarity on the structure of the training that the centre offers. That's probably the most important thing.
Yep.
Understand the gives and the gets, right? Are you paying or are you earning? But also, if you're paying, is it an internship? How does that work? How does that structure of knowledge development and experience being hung off those hooks work? How long does it take? That would be a really good indicator in terms of the experience that you're going to work out. And then the last thing to look for is anything you can find out about reputation. There's a lot to look at out there in terms of word of mouth, you know, asking your instructors, those people around you. Sometimes it can be a little bit hard. By the time people have figured out whether their training was good or not, might be 2 years after they did something. So kind of looking back isn't always there.
And we also have to remember that you cannot look at the dive centre's rating as an indication of quality. So for example, a PADI 5-star centre isn't 5-star because their capability is very good. It's 5-star because they pay more money to PADI for a high level of membership.
Well, and there's no 4, 3, 2 or 1-star centres.
As you become a 5-star IDC centre, it basically means that I can now teach instructors at my course, but a career development centre needs to be able to offer the full range of services and probably has more volume of professional training. But it's not fair to say that a platinum instructor is a better instructor than a regular one. It just means they do more volume.
So moving on, obviously instructor is the next grade on from Divemaster. Sometimes you will have had work experience as a Divemaster before going on. Quite a lot of people will go straight on from Divemaster into instructing. And this is absolutely the first time where a decision about the agency is fundamentally important, because crossovers nowadays, they're a thing of the past. So to go from one agency to another agency, you will have to pay all of your development fees and membership fees again. So you need to think, where do you want to work? Who's the predominant agency there? Or do you know who you want to go and work for and what agency are they aligned to?
And this is certainly where the market fragmenting in the way that it has done in the last few years has meant that it is harder and harder for people to make those choices. I certainly know when I came through 15 years ago, the choice was PADI. You did a PADI instructor, and the other training agencies represented such a small share of the market that there was no point in choosing anybody else.
If you wanted to work in France, you might do CMAS. If you wanted to work anywhere else,
it was PADI. And so now we're in a situation where certainly in places like Southeast Asia, SSI and SDI are as popular as PADI, maybe even more so. That choice becomes more difficult. And with the price of instructor development training, the amount of money that you can spend to become an instructor becomes a significant barrier to entry into the market. So you have to really think about where it is you want to go and work. Where we are, Caribbean, PADI is still the dominant agency.
So the second thing to think about is where you would like to do your training, and that has a strong correlation with where you think that you would like to work. Because despite the global standards that exist for instructor training, you will find that there's kind of an affinity between where you do your training and where you will find it easiest to get your first job when you come out of your training. So European centres do like European career development. The Far East is comfortable with Far Eastern training centres, and so on. So the third thing that you're going to want to look at is really getting clarity for the costs, because when you start to look online, you're going to see that there appears to be a big difference in the costs between the places that you can go and do your training. That's not true in reality.
And the reality is that there are certain cost buckets that make up your instructor development course and getting all the way through your instructor exam. And those cost buckets don't vary much depending on where you are in the world, because the drivers of the cost in those buckets are much the same regardless of geography. And those buckets include the actual cost of your IDC. How much does it cost to deliver the training course in resorts? And prices pretty much match around the world, because if I know I can charge this here, why can't I charge it for the same experience somewhere else? The cost of a course director is not significantly different regardless of where you are in the world. Then you're going to have your fees. These are the fees you pay to your training agency. In this instance, we'll use PADI. You're going to have a fee to do your IDC, an IDC completion fee. You're going to have an EFR instructor fee. You're going to have an instructor examination fee, and then ultimately you're going to have your membership fees that are going to come at the end of that. All of those are set by PADI, and they don't change around the world. So if you see a big disparity of one location offering an instructor development course at $1,500 and another one offering at $4,000, it's that one of them is being more honest with the costs and the other one might not be.
Yeah. the cost variations are just going to be little currency variations.
Honestly,
And then it's your accommodation and living costs is going to be the other element that's different. You do see some places trying to drive a little bit of differentiation if they're adding bells and whistles around it. And actually those bells and whistles could be really worth it. One of the things that I realise in retrospect about my instructor training is how it's been honed over time to help people pass their exam, right? My IDC was all about passing the instructor examination at the end. And where I am now, I realise that actually, does it teach you enough about being an instructor? You know, there's the old adage, you learn to pass your driving test and then you learn to drive. And it sort of feels a little bit similar here. The variations that you're going to find are just going to be little currency variations, and then probably the thing that you have the most control over are your travel and living expenses.
And so one of the things I'll always say to people when they are looking at what are the costs and what are the time allocations for completing an instructor development course is, what are the minimum requirements for delivery? So if you know that the minimum requirements for delivering a PADI instructor development course is 8 days, and that you're embarking on an 8-day course, then you know that you're getting the absolute minimum training. And if you're happy with paying the minimum price to get the minimum training, all is good. But if you're looking to get a bit more mastery, if you're looking to get a bit more value for your money, maybe you want to be looking at those instructor development courses that are run over more days, where they can get you involved in a little bit more detail of the training and provide you with a little bit more opportunity to have one-on-one time with your course director or your staff instructors. It's just food for thought as you're thinking about what is the best opportunities. Yes, it's about value proposition, but where is the value? Is the value in the end goal, I got my instructor rating for the lowest possible price, therefore value, or did I get the best training? It cost me more, but it's the better training. Where's the trade-off?
I think this is kind of the nub of this bit about instructor training, and interestingly, this is where more centres do Gary's model for DM. If I look back in my case, I can see how the IDC has been honed to help candidates get through the instructor examination. It's like learning to pass your driving test and then learning to drive. I feel like I learnt to pass my test and now I'm learning to drive. And in reality, I'd have probably liked a more holistic kind of program for my instructor training there, and might have done it somewhere differently, because what I now know is that there are other places who will do IDC, IE, and then they do like an MSDT, the Master Scuba Diver Trainer internship.
Yep.
So you can then stay because you hit the standards and the quality of teaching that they want, and you can then go on and build that experience that you need. But I think that's the cue to the kicker that we set up at the start. The real learning comes in your first job. It doesn't matter whether you're a DM or instructor, the real learning is in that first job. And it's worth thinking about what you want from that first job. Are you wanting to guide, or do you want to instruct? Where it'll never be all of one or all of the other.
Correct.
So where does the balance kind of lie in?
And it's really important then, when you are approaching your first job, that you recognise that you are now stepping onto the first rung, whether it is as a dive master, whether it is as a newly minted instructor, but you're stepping onto that first rung with no experience. You've got the knowledge of how to micro teach and how to deliver a course, but now you're going to be leaning on those people around you in terms of how do you deliver that course in the environment that you're in and with the safety that is expected of you. Be prepared to listen, be prepared to work with those instructors around you to ensure that you can gain as much of the experience as you possibly can through that initial period. And don't approach it as I know everything, mate, I'm good.
Yeah.
Check me or my beer.
I'm sure there must be examples of that, but luckily my experiences, they're relatively few and far between. But I think that choice of of course they've got to choose you as much as you choose them, right? But that first job and trying to find somewhere where you can be mentored or have a mentor, so that's the difference for me from having a community around you or going somewhere where you know you're going to learn a particular first.
I agree with that.
That element of a first job is really useful. I mean, don't get me wrong, right? You go anywhere, you could go somewhere, and that's quite happy to have a freshly baked instructor because they've got a rhythm, they've got their templates, and you will learn to fit inside that template. But will it give you kind of the industry expertise? Do you understand how customers got in the funnel? Do you know about the customer success? For me, I want the longevity in the industry, that actually I want that wraparound stuff as well. It may not be you. I'm not saying that's the right thing, just I'm saying know what you want to do and why you want to do it.
I hope this long video has been informative and helpful, and we've given you some ideas or some thoughts as you're structuring and thinking about your Divemaster course, your Divemaster training, or indeed if it's your instructor courses that you're thinking about in the future. If you've got any comments, make sure you hit down in the comment section below. We'll respond to each and every comment as they come in. If you've enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, splash down on the subscribe, and hit the bell icon to get notified of any future content as it comes in. We've really appreciated you watching us. We'll be back again next week with some new interesting content. Thanks for watching. Stay diving.
Bye now.